welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and this is the programme where you can have your property-related questions answered by our team of property experts. Joining me today are Byron Crellin, MD of Debt Squared Group Limited, and via Zoom from France, Joanna Leggett, co-founder of Leggett Immobilier.
Hi Stephen, it's great to be here again. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Byron.
Hi, Stephen.
We'll start with you. Your first question is, I own a commercial retail property and have an existing tenant in place. However, even before COVID hit us, I was experiencing difficulties in receiving my due rent on time and sometimes not at all. As far as I understand it, I've been precluded from taking any positive action in terms of my rent recovery, but those protections for the tenant are, I understand, coming to an end. My question is, should I use an external debt recovery agent to collect all the outstanding rents, current and past, or should I go straight into legal proceedings as soon as they are allowed? That's pretty broad, isn't it?
Indeed. Thank you for that. I think in the first instance, the question of should I use an external agent? Yes.
Right. Why did I think you'd say that? But anyway, carry on.
But the thing is that the government have put legislation in place to protect tenants through the COVID pandemic, but there is the ability still to collect rent using an enforcement company. So we are acting for clients. There is criteria in place, and again, it's a case of a landlord engaging with us. You know, I'll speak to numerous landlords on a daily basis, or managing agents, to talk through arrears, etc. So at the moment, the government have got a guideline in place that says if there are 457 days worth of rent that is due, then it's recoverable, and you can engage with an enforcement company to recover the outstanding arrears. If it's below that threshold, you can't. So there is mechanism that's available to enforce, and in addition to that, the government are going to update. So on the 24th of June, you've got a further update coming in terms of number of days due for rent in order to qualify to engage with an enforcement company. In addition to that, on the 30th of June, the government are to update the emergency legislation that came into play that says what's the requirements in terms of how a landlord can pursue for their arrears. So it's a moving target. Reverse that, the first thing to do as a landlord, and I think so many landlords have, they are engaging with tenants and they're collecting their rent, and it will be through payment plans. There is arrears out there, of course there are, but landlords are working with tenants to agree payment plans. If though your tenant is systematically defaulting or not contacting you or engaging with you, then it would be to reach out to ourselves and let's work it through. Let's find out, first of all, what do the arrears look like in terms of how many days you've got outstanding, etc., and look at the remedies that are available. I think that's probably the easiest and the starting point. That thereafter, it's whether they've got the ability to pay and what's going to come down the line.
I thought there was a government, perhaps I'm wrong, Byron, but I thought there was a government caveat that said actually if the arrears or the issues had started before the COVID legislation, then that sort of precluded them from that protection. Is that not right? So
the government arrears that were pre-COVID, what the government did, they had to bring in emergency legislation. So historically, what would happen is you would engage and instruct us with arrears that are typically quarterly due in advance. Most commercial leases are billed quarterly in advance. You've got some tenants that are on monthlies. In terms of when the government introduced the registration, what they had to do is they had to think about what was in the legacy aspect and going forward to basically put a protection net over businesses. So any tenants that were in arrears pre-COVID will be caught up within the current legislation. Okay, all right, good. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you, Byron. Right, over to the lovely French countryside and Joanna Leggett. Joanna, your question is, if I relocate with my family to France and start perhaps an accommodation-based type of business, are the tax rates and general costs still roughly in line with the UK? The purpose of my question is to assist with the
evaluation and subsequent profitability of any potential business that I eventually source?
Well, first of all, the taxes are fairly similar to what they are in the UK for any type of business. If you're looking at becoming a resident, then obviously you'll be a resident in France, and you'll be paying social charges and the normal taxes like a normal French resident would pay, or like myself. That would get you into the healthcare system. The healthcare system, they provide 70% care cover, but you would need to take out an extra 30% in top-up insurance, which isn't as expensive as it is in the UK, but you would need to look at that. With regards to renting properties, if you're looking at sort of a gîte rental business, then bear in mind that the season is probably April to September. So that's where you're going to earn your sort of money or your income. And in the winter months, unless you have heating, it's going to really, really quieten down. So you need to bear that in mind whilst looking for properties. If you're looking at doing long-term rentals, again, that's a different market. Then you probably want to be looking at cities, because you'll get much more return on investment in a city than you will in a rural countryside, where the properties are actually quite cheap to rent, a lot cheaper to rent than they are in the UK. But city prices will be very similar to what they are in the UK. So it's really narrowing down what type of business you actually want to run. If you have anything that's over 6 bedrooms, then you're classed as a hotel. So not so much if it's a gîte and you're renting the whole gîte out, but if you're renting chambre d'hôtes and you have more than 6 bedrooms, then a lot of restrictions come in place, because you are classed as a hotel and they have to have fire regulations and everything else. But anything under 6, if it's a chambre d'hôte bed and breakfast, you don't need those regulations. So it's really finding out what type of business you want to run. And there's so much help in France. I mean, there's so many Brits that have moved over and running businesses in France, all over France. So there'll be lots of help at hand, and there's lots of forums and things that you can go on. And once the exhibitions are back, in the UK, you can go along to an exhibition and talk to some experts there as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Joanna. Joanna, just one question for those viewers who don't know, what is a gîte?
Yeah, a gîte is like a guest house. So you have your main house, and then you may have 3 or 4 little country cottages as such, that families can come along and rent, usually on a weekly basis. So they may come for 1 week or 2 weeks. There's lots of different types of gîtes. You'll have big gîtes where they might have 4 or 5 bedrooms and a few families will come together. With those ones, you generally do need a swimming pool, because obviously people coming with children definitely want a pool. But then if you just want to have a little bit of supplementary income, you could just get a small 1-bedroom gîte, because you get a lot of couples traveling. We see a lot of couples as clients who are actually looking for property. So they don't care if there's a pool or anything else. They just need somewhere to rent while they're looking. Then you get a lot of cyclists, painters and things like that. Again, not really bothered about a pool. So the smaller gîtes are always very good for couples. But if you're looking at the bigger gîtes, that would be more so for families. And then again, you would probably need a pool.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Joanna. Well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Byron Crellin and Joanna Leggett. Welcome back to you both. Byron, your second question is, do the panel think that the COVID forced trend towards working from home will be a lasting change to our work practices? If so, will it have a downward effect on commercial values and in particular office building values?
That's a crystal ball one.
Isn't it? Well, you're a good chump. You've got a good commercial knowledge base, haven't you? And I think if anybody's able to perhaps judge that without agenda, then
I was on a Zoom call, as my life has been for the past year, this week, and there was a whole varied range of businesses representing funds, etc., on the call, and I think the general consensus was, businesses are coming back to work. For our own business, our team have been back in on a Monday and a Thursday, remote, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, so you're keeping that blend. I generally think that they want to be back, but there is this, we can do this remote as well. Every business is unique. I mean, in the banking world, it might be different to, the recovery world in terms of process, etc., and looking at screens and making decisions. But I think the general view is that businesses need to get back. But I think what the government have got to do is the government have got to say it's safe to travel. It's you get back there, get back into the offices, bring the town, bring the cities back to life again. I was on my first train since COVID today, coming down to see you today, and one of three people in the carriage. Euston was empty. Taxi driver was. I thought he was going to drive to the cliffs of Dover at one point. Business was that bad. So it's an important thing from the government aspect is to say, let's get the businesses, let's get the offices back open again. But I think the landscape, I don't think we'll go back to the norm. I think there will be businesses that use this, what we've learned, and I think from an employee's point of view and an employer point of view, I think it's a case of, if it's worked and it's worked well, do we need the office? Do we need the size of the office?
Well, I suppose the slight danger is, I mean, in the residential world, we've had in residential leases for many years no business clauses. It's a residential home, and that's what it should be used for.
Yeah.
Not an extension of a company's activities out of the city. I do wonder sometimes how we sit with those clauses these days.
Yeah.
It might be an issue if it's attached and associated with other contentious issues in the property. May not be work related, but maybe something else.
Absolutely. I mean, I think business owners would say they're probably getting more hours out of because anyone's having to commute. Again, referring back to the round table that I was on at the beginning of this week, one particular spokes party was saying that they've got thousands of employees and they won't commute into the city, or the issue that they've got in coming back into the city or cities that they're based in is that they use Oyster cards. And if they're only coming in 2 days a week and not 5 days a week, I'm still paying full dollar.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and I think it's a confidence thing. We're not going to. There's no, green light. Everybody back to normal again. It's going to be a phase back. The government are doing their phase back in terms of legislation, etc.
I think the other difficulty is it depends what kind of business you are. I mean, from a management point of view, if you're a large company and people have got specifically sort of designated tasks and therefore inherent performance measures, that's fairly easy to regulate. If you're dealing with somebody whose job is really performance related, I don't know how you judge when they're working from home whether you're getting full value or not. I know that's looking at it very much from an employer's side of things, but it's difficult to gauge, isn't it? And also I think the discipline of working from home, you've got to question how long it's sustainable for before you get distracted.
I totally agree, but it's one of those things. Until you're in the mix, you just don't know which way it's going to come out. Because for the last 12 months, we've been in new territory. Certainly, I've never been in a lockdown. The first lockdown, everybody says it wasn't too bad because it was sunny. And all our gardens looked great, and we were doing our house jobs whilst working, of course. The second lockdown, I think people were getting fed up. They were getting miserable. Did that impact on their performance?
Yeah, maybe.
Potentially.
Yeah. Okay, Byron, thank you very much for that. So, Joanna, over to you in France for your last question. Please, could you give a brief overview to the state of the property market in France in the light of the current COVID-19 situation and your predictions for later this year?
Yeah, well, we've seen, last year was huge again for France. There was over 1 million sales in the last year. We don't see that dropping down at all. It's been hugely busy. The French are buying up everything. They're moving from cities to countryside, or they're buying pied-à-terres in cities and buying a bigger family home in the countryside. I think the pandemic has really opened people's minds, and they're sort of looking at their situation. Do we want to be stuck in if this happens again? And also travel, because of the problems we've had with travel over the last couple of years with the COVID, it's people aren't traveling so far. So we'll see a lot of people, say, for example, in Paris, that will buy a holiday home in Brittany, rather than go to Portugal or another country. So we're seeing a lot more people buying holiday homes, the French in particular buying holiday homes in their own country as opposed to buying abroad now. So the market's been very, very good. The big cities, the prices had been rising for a while, but they've kind of tapered off now. They're not going to go down. But because of the demand for countryside properties, we are starting to see increases. They're sort of up between 3 and 5%, depending on where you are. And that could rise because of the amount of sales, there is less stock. In the old days when I used to sell, you'd sell one property, it might take 6 months to sell, and you might only have one offer on it. But these days you might have 3 clients going after the same property. So it's quite important, if you're coming from the UK, that you make sure you've got your finances in place, you make sure that you're in a position to buy, and you're ready, and don't hesitate. If it's the right property for you, then do put the offer in, because we are seeing like 2 to 3 people going after the same house, which has never happened before. So the market is really, really strong. Even our sales, we're 50% up on what we were last year, and bearing in mind we've had 2 lockdowns. So it's that's how quickly the property market is changing and how it is working. And not just from the French, the internationals are still buying. We've been selling a lot of properties just virtually, where we've videoed them, we've gone to the house, we've done live video links with the clients. Everything can be done digitally, everything can be signed digitally. So we've actually sold properties in the last year, and the clients haven't even been able to come and see them yet. So, the market has completely changed, and a lot of things can be done virtually, and it's moving very quickly.
Joanna, thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for on today's show. So a big thank you to Byron Crellin. Thank you very much indeed for coming all the way down to London to participate. Great answers. Thank you very much indeed. And to Joanna, thank you for joining us from France. Always good to see you, and we look forward to the days when you can travel over and join us in the studio. Okay, so for me, Stephen Galpin, thank you very much for watching Property Question Time. See you again next time.